They say the fog in Cedar Hollow was older than the trees. It crept low and stayed long, as if the land itself was holding its breath. In that fog, sounds traveled like secrets, slow, uncertain, sacred. Long before the tale began, the hollow was home to whispers no settler could explain. By the time the war between land-hungry men and nature's old, children reached the edge of this valley. The Shawnee had learned not to speak its name aloud at night. One cold dusk in late autumn, a rider emerged from the hills, slumped forward in the saddle. His horse limped. His chest was soaked in rust-colored blood. The settlers at Red Clay Station said he was a cattle thief, maybe worse. But he carried no saddlebag, no weapon. Just a map scrawled in charcoal and the word rainwater scratched into its edge. The girl who saw him first wasn't a settler. Her name was Weah. She walked barefoot and wore her grief like the braid. Down her back, long, silent, never cut. She wasn't supposed to be there, tending the elder roots along the riverbank. But her mother had died by those waters, and Weah came each week to sing the old songs. That evening, as the fog folded in and swallowed the pine, she saw the cowboy fall. She did not scream. She walked. His breath came in shallow notes like wind in a broken flute. Weah knelt beside him, her palms trembling but firm. Blood pooled in the hollows of his ribs. He tried to speak, but only coughed dirt. She pressed a damp cloth to his lips and hummed, the way her mother once did during storms. Then, with a shiver, the man whispered a single name, Rainwater Creek. It meant nothing to her and everything, because in the stories her grandmother once whispered, rainwater was not a place but a promise. A creek where the broken went to wash away what they could not bear. A place no map held, only memory. Before the cowboy closed his eyes, he grabbed her wrist, not out of fear, but plea. His fingers, cracked and frostbitten, traced something on her skin, 3 shapes, a tree, a circle, and a wave. Then he exhaled, a sound like apology, and was gone. By morning, they found only the horse, tied gently to a cedar, eyes wild but unharmed. The body was gone. So was Weah. The settlers said the girl had stolen from the dead and fled. The tribe said she had heard a calling, but her grandmother, old Meta, knew better. She sat beneath the cedar tree for 3 days, eyes open, lips unmoving. When the 3rd morning came, she spoke to no one. Only carved 3 signs in the bark, a tree, a circle, and a wave. Some say Weah walked into the fog that night following the creek's pull. Others say the fog walked into her. But even years later, children claimed they saw a girl by the river, barefoot, hair like raven silk, humming in a tongue older than English. Rainwater Creek, if it existed, was not kind. Its banks were sharp with bone root and rustweed. Trees leaned in as if whispering warnings. But Weah kept walking. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The cowboy's final breath pressed on her chest like a stone. She saw the signs he'd drawn in dreams, the tree bent low, the circle burning, the wave breaking. When she found the creek, it was no wider than a horse's stride, but it shimmered with something unspoken. The moment she knelt to drink, the ground pulsed. A hush fell over the land, even the birds stilled, and in the water surface she saw not her own face, but the cowboy's younger, smiling faintly, holding a child. She wept not for the image, but for what it meant. This man had once loved, once hoped, once lived far from blood and dust. In that creek she left a piece of herself, not as sacrifice, but as remembrance. When Weah returned, weeks had passed, or days, or none. Her braid was shorter, her eyes older. She carried no sack, no wound, just a smooth river stone clutched in both hands. To the tribal elders she said little, but she began etching stories into cedar bark, stories that were not hers. A boy who walked westward for redemption. A woman who forgave a killer with her last breath. A cowboy who rode alone, not to escape, but to be remembered. The others called her strange, possessed, but the old ones watched in silence. Because the stories matched the ones only they remembered, from generations past, from lives lived before maps were drawn. Sheriff Brody had buried too many men without names, but the cowboy haunted him more than the rest. He couldn't forget the look on that dead man's face, not fear, not peace, but a kind of quiet guilt, as if he'd done something long ago that still begged forgiveness. One evening, drawn by dreams, the sheriff rode to the edge of the woods and found Weah sitting by the creek. She didn't look up when he approached. "You knew him?" he asked. She nodded. "Who was he?" She dipped her hand in the water. "A man who remembered too late." That night, Brody slept for the first time in months. In his dream, he saw the cowboy again, this time smiling, shoulders lighter, beside a girl with raven dark hair. In a town 100 miles south, a woman received a parcel with no return name. Inside was a river stone, smooth and cool. Wrapped in deerskin was a map, charcoal marks etched in a trembling hand. She recognized the handwriting. Her husband's. But he'd been missing 5 winters now, presumed dead in outlaw territory. She wept in silence, then packed her bags and rode north. She never spoke of what she found in Cedar Hollow, only that the fog never scared her again. The drought came heavy that year, splitting the ground like broken skin. The creek thinned to a whisper, its song nearly lost beneath the crackling of dry grass and groaning trees. That summer, the oldest sycamore near the water's bend, the one with roots like outstretched arms, began to lean. Its bark peeled like brittle parchment. The birds stopped nesting in it. Weah watched it daily, saying nothing, her eyes holding the sadness of someone who already knew what would happen. When the rains finally returned in late August, they didn't bring relief. Instead, the ground turned to clay, thick and swollen, and the sycamore gave way in the night. It didn't crash, it sighed as it fell, a great hush rolling through the hollow. Children were the first to find it, chasing a deer down the softened bank. They froze at what lay exposed beneath the torn roots, not treasure, not stone but bones, folded gently in earth wrapped in a weather-worn cattleman's coat. One hand, skeletal and curled, still gripped a locket pressed to the chest like a final prayer. News spread quickly. The sheriff came. So did curious settlers whispering behind hands, casting looks at Weah from beneath wide brims. But she said nothing, just walked through the crowd, barefoot and calm, carrying a small bundle wrapped in shawl cloth. She knelt by the bones and unwrapped the bundle. A smooth stone marked with 3 symbols, a tree, a circle, and a wave. Beside it, she placed a cedar sprig. Then, with steady hands, she gathered the remains into a handmade shroud of woven grass and Shawnee cloth. No sermon was spoken, no name carved into the grave's wood marker. Only one word, burned into the cedar cross by Weah's own hand: returned. That evening, fog crept back into the hollow thicker than in years. The townsfolk said it came to keep the grave company. But the old ones knew, the creek remembered, and it was whole again. It began slowly, as all hauntings do. A child, half asleep, heard a man laugh softly near the cedar tree, though no one stood there. A widow, tending her washing at dusk, swore she caught the hum of an old river song she hadn't heard since childhood. And an old trapper, hardened by decades, refused to camp near the hollow, saying the fog didn't feel like weather, it felt like breath. At first they said it was nonsense. The wind, dreams, old minds making ghosts where there were none. But the voices kept coming. Not angry, not cruel, just familiar, gentle murmurs. As if a fireless cabin still had a hearth, and someone sat beside it, telling stories. Weah said nothing, but she listened. Each evening she sat by the creek's edge with her eyes closed, as if remembering something the world had long forgotten. Sometimes she smiled. Other times she wept. She no longer wrote on cedar bark. She no longer sang aloud. She simply listened. The voices grew louder when the fog thickened, clearer, the name. Rainwater drifted often through the mist, not as a warning, but a lullaby. A name not of place but of peace. The settlers stopped hunting near the hollow. Even the youngest knew you don't step into the place where the dead still walk kindly. The fog didn't haunt the land, it protected it. The fire started 5 miles east, a single ember from a logger's pipe. By nightfall, the pines were ablaze, turning sky to blood. Flames leapt across dry fields, swallowing cabins, barns, and fences in a single breath. The wind turned cruel, as if stoking revenge. The people of Red Clay packed what they could and ran. The fire roared toward Cedar Hollow like a beast too long starved. And yet, it stopped. No one could explain it. The next morning, the hollow remained untouched. Not a blade of grass singed. The sycamore grave, the cedar tree, the creek all stood whole, wrapped in the thick fog that hadn't budged for days. Where the fire should have claimed everything, it had split in two, curling around the hollow like water parting around stone. Those who had seen the blaze with their own eyes fell silent, and when they rode down into the hollow to see the miracle, they found her, Weah, standing barefoot in the river's shallows, a single streak of ash across her face. Not a burn marked her skin. Not a thread of her dress was blackened. They asked her what she'd done. She looked up at them with quiet sorrow. "I didn't keep it away," she said softly. "It kept me." From that day on, no one called her strange. No one whispered of curses or spirits. They called her the keeper of the creek, of the grave, of a story only the fog still remembered. Decades passed. The railroad came. Towns changed. Names faded. But the creek still ran, and the fog still came each dusk, folding over the land like a tired shawl. One spring, a woman stepped off the Red Clay station train, tall, curious pen in hand. She was a writer from the East, chasing tailies for her novel. A toothless elder in the carriage had spoken of the girl who vanished into fog, and the cowboy who named a river before dying. She didn't believe him. Not really. But when she stepped into Cedar Hollow, something shifted. The air felt still, expectant. The wind moved in circles, not lines. She followed the creek's bend and found the grave, the cedar still standing. The name returned etched deep into its skin. A stone sat at its base, the carving still visible after all these years. And for a moment, only a breath. She swore she heard a man's voice humming an old river song, and a girl's laughter, soft and distant. She raised her pen, then lowered it. This wasn't a tale for print, she realized. It was something older. A prayer, a wound, a love letter scrawled in fog and time. That night she left the hollow without a single note. Some stories weren't meant for pages. They were meant for silence. No one ever saw Weah die. One morning, she simply didn't return to the creek. The path she'd walked for decades remained untouched, save for a single smooth stone placed in its center. The fog came earlier that evening, thick and low, curling between branches and stones like it was looking for her. The creek still ran, slow, clear, unchanged. Birds still paused at its edge. The cedar still whispered in wind. But her presence was gone. Not in absence, but in fullness. Like a song that has ended but still echoes in the heart. Some say she became the fog. Others believe she walked into the river and never looked back. But the old ones knew better. Weah hadn't vanished. She had become the hollow. And some evenings, when the light softens and the frogs begin to hum, if you sit by Rainwater Creek with your eyes closed and your heart open, you'll hear a name carried on the breeze. Not the cowboy's. Hers. Weah. The girl who listened. The girl who kept the story. The girl who never truly left.